Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. My guest today is Kristalina Georgieva. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the World Bank, the first to hold that position. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You were formerly a European Union Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs. You were also Vice President of the EU Commission in charge of the budget and staffing. Obviously, the World Bank has a vast array of areas of interventions, but I want to get to one of the areas that's been an area of debate, controversy here in Europe, the so-called migrant crisis. We've seen recently some Western heads of state convene in Paris with some African heads of state to try to find maybe a more pragmatic solution to this very long crisis. Do you think this is the way to go to try to really tackle the issue?
I very much agree this is the way to go. Stating the obvious, the best way to deal with the crisis, not to have it in the first place. And when we talk about movement of people, why do they leave? They leave either because they're forced by war or disasters, or they leave in search of better opportunities. The more we invest, and this is the job of the World Bank, in countries, so children are in school, adults have jobs, and conditions, living conditions gradually improve, the more chances for people to stay where they are, we are creating. Secondly, when we look at the movement of people, we do have to make a distinction between those who are pushed to leave and those who are leaving on their own will. And for those that are pushed to leave, of course, putting an end to a conflict is not an easy thing, but political solutions are necessary. The world has to stay focused on resolving the reasons for conflicts. And then remember, when people are forced to leave, more often than not, they want to go home. This is what they dream of. And they usually stay close to their own communities and countries. So helping the countries that are first stop of refugees, the Jordans and the Lebanons of this world, is a very good way to prevent a massive movement towards Europe. And we at the World Bank have invented something very good. It is a concessional facility to bring grant money so loans are cheap for Jordan and Lebanon. And as a result of that, we have Syrian refugees working in Jordan, we have opportunities in Lebanon. And these are smart investments for Europe to support.
Right, but is Europe doing enough? As you said, the vast majority of those people being forced to leave are in those countries of transition. That's the way they're called. Nevertheless, Europe has been divided, especially between the East and the West. As a Bulgarian, you're probably sensitive to this issue. And so Europe is complaining, but is it doing enough to prevent this phenomenon?
Europe has stepped up to the plate in recent years massively. In fact, my last action as Vice President for Budget in the European Union was to triple funding for the countries that are hosting refugees.
But they're saying it's not enough.
Of course, Europe can, and I'm convinced would do more. And more not just on this area where refugees are hosted, the host communities, the countries, the refugees, but also at the root of the problem. Invest in the stability and security of Mali, of Central African Republic, of the countries that are sourcing the desperate people. This long-term is the very best investment Europe can make. And I can say for credit to Europe, that it has been noticeable that Europe has increased its financing for the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the region that is most vulnerable. We now have a $75 billion fund for the poor countries because to a significant degree of the voice of the Europeans. Every 3 years, we go to collect money for the poor countries. Last time we got $50 billion. This time around, 50% more, $75 billion. And a big driver of it is the recognition of our members, especially the Europeans, that investing in development is also investment in our own security.
I want to get to another issue. The World Bank is also very involved in climate change. France has convened a summit here in Paris on December 12th, 2 years after the Paris Accord was reached. Obviously, things have changed. Noticeably, the Trump administration has withdrawn from that agreement. How do you keep the momentum with the major player out of the game?
Yeah. We, as an institution, have been engaged on this topic of climate change for 25 years. Before it was fashionable, we have been working on it. Why? Because it is obvious that climate risks are undermining development and that the poorest countries are most severely impacted. And what we are doing now is to deepen that commitment and increase our engagement. Just to give you a comparator number, over the last 10 years, we have been funding around $10 billion in climate action, low carbon growth, resilient development. The trend is up. By 2020, we intend to be in the neighborhood of 17, 18 to $20 billion, almost, to double this. In other words, over the years, we have seen our membership, 189 countries, being in different places on this topic. There was time when China was against or India was against. But what is very clear is that the evidence is telling us climate change is for real. We are the first generation to experience the impact of climate change. We are the last generation that can do something about it. So at the bank, we finance climate action, we innovate, we create new ways in tackling this problem, and we make sure that good policies are those that countries where we work embrace.
So you're saying this is unstoppable because countries, companies, cities are committed to it despite Donald Trump's...
They're on the move. You look at the United States, businesses, cities, the understanding of the danger, but also the understanding of the business opportunity. When you look at the United States, some 250, 300,000 jobs come in renewable energy.
So there's no going back.
There's no going back.
I want to get quickly to something the bank has done recently, and that's not very usual. You granted $200 million to fight cholera in Yemen. Yemen is obviously a major crisis nobody really talks about. There are other forgotten crises, quote unquote, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Burundi. Why did the bank decide to act in this war that's also a very controversial war because of the dispute between Saudi Arabia and Iran and so on?
Let me first thank you for bringing Yemen to the attention of your viewers. A country that has been hit by a prolonged war, then by a drought, and that combination of conflict and drought led to famine. 7 million people in Yemen, children, women, men, are at the risk of dying from that. And on top of it comes cholera. As a development organization, we recognize that no more we can leave these kinds of protracted crises to the humanitarian community to provide the rescue, that we need to stay engaged.
That's a big change.
It is a massive change, and it is driven by the world around us, where these protracted conflicts, protracted crises are now more prominent. And on top of it comes the hammer of climate change, of natural disasters. What we see now is that we have to fund actions that are helping to respond immediately. In Yemen, that means making sure there is clean water, that there is some medical service, that there is medication, that we can use chlorine to provide drinking water to people. But at the same time, build the longer-term resilience by investing in health facilities, water supply and sanitation, thinking of the day when the war would finally end. And if I can say something interesting for the World Bank, I was there 7 years ago, and the bank was much less engaged in this kinds of crisis situation. Traditionally, you think of world bankers, people in suits, in the high corridors of power. Now I go to places like Central African Republic, or when I go to the Middle East, many of my colleagues, they go with helmets on their heads, with bulletproof vests. They are in the field there where people are affected. And that is a reflection of the needs of development. And this is why we got trusted with our largest ever replenishment for our fund for the poor.
Right, but this is, in a nutshell, a more political role also for the bank, because you're intervening in crises where obviously there's a war, there are different factions, and so you get into a more difficult environment.
It is a more difficult environment, but we don't deal with the political aspects of it. Our job is to make sure that there is hope and help for people, and that we are present throughout difficult times so we can help countries rebuild. When it comes in our articles of agreement, it is very clear that it is not for us to take any position in political situations, but we can provide a platform for stability to return faster and for recovery to be more effective. And that is what we do.
Kristalina Georgieva, thank you very much for coming on the France 24 set, and thank you for watching this interview. Stay tuned for more news.
Porque la historia se escribe día a día. Porque la actualidad no espera. La información, donde quiera que esté. En cualquier circunstancia. Todos los temas. Para entender el mundo, para imaginar el mundo. France 24, una mirada diferente, a partir del 26 de septiembre, en español.